Peace and love. You are now listening to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center. I am your host, Deidre Emel, Director of the Western New York Peace Center. And today we're going to talk about domestic violence and what that means and what organizations that are in our area right now that are helping individuals and families with this issue. So we have our former board member and assistant co-chair, Karima Morris, USA Today's one of USA Today's Women of the Year 2023. Congratulations again.
Thank you so
And
much.
and she's also the founder and co-founder of Bury the Violence, which is an organization that assists with um, uh, finding missing children and trafficked children and also runaways. Along with that, also help assist people with domestic violence issues in their communities. So we also have new to our Talking Peace show, Mrs. Mary Jones Clavel. Welcome, Mrs. Clavel. She is
Thank
a
you.
No problem. I'm so glad that you're here. She's a licensed social worker. She has been working with families for over 40 years. And uh, she's my loving auntie. uh, but, I just loved her work throughout the years. And I just wanted to give you a little more information about her. And I'm just
Mhm.
going to go ahead and just pull her up here. Get a little bit more information about her. Okay, so with over 2 decades of service as a licensed clinical social worker, Mrs. Clavel has worked with various communities and individuals in domestic violence, in mental health services, and I'm sorry, there we go. And currently works in private practice, providing clinical counseling, therapy to adults. She helped co-founded or founder. I want to make sure I'm clear on the healing.
Yeah, so yeah. Hmm.
Okay, so she co-founded the Healing Station agency in 2021, and she currently holds the position of co-chair on the board for the Healing Station, along with and she works with other licensed social workers for that agency in assisting individuals with domestic violence issues. So, welcome, Dr. Clavel. It's so good to see you and to have
Thank you.
you piece today. Yes,
Mhm.
no problem. I'm excited to have you. We've been talking about it for at least 6 months.
Yeah, I think so, Deidre.
More.
It's been a while that we've been trying to do this, so I'm so glad we're able to do it tonight. Things I call it Murphy's Law would occur, like it can do anytime. So I'm
Exactly.
glad we're here. Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, well, we always start off with talking peace. Is we always give thanks, following our indigenous brothers and sisters of Haudenosaunee in this particular area of the world, and of course many other indigenous cultures, including our African indigenous cultures, that give thanks before we start our gatherings. So we just like to, just give thanks for the waters, for the sky, for the fish, for the land, for the love that's still in people, for the peace that still exists. We would like to give thanks for the ants and for uh, the animals and for the plants and for the trees. I'd like to give thanks for the ozone layer that's in its perfect space, in its perfectness for us to breathe and for us to live. Um, we give thanks for all things. We give thanks for to our Creator. So we just wanted to. We usually do that as our beginning of all of our events and so on. And yeah, that's a part of what we do as the Western New York Peace Center.
Mhm.
So, um, so I wanted to start our discussion with about the values we bring to this discussion today. What values do you want people to think about, to remember? What's on your minds? And anyone
Mhm.
can just jump in there.
Well,
Dr.
when you say values, what comes to my mind is a genuineness, care, and empathy in the work that I do or we do with domestic violence victims, and just the whole concern of this public ill of domestic violence. So I'm hoping to that I will portray that in the next 50 minutes um, in terms of I consider it a value to have people who actually care about what's going on publicly, and it's not just talk, and they're really trying to do something about it.
Right, that's right. Thank you. And Karima?
Yes, the values that I bring today are confidentiality, compassion, and belief. Because many times we're in this position, Buffalo's so small, sometimes you may be divulging information of someone's, and someone has an idea of who you're talking about. And you've broke the confidentiality because it shouldn't even be a topic when you're a trusted advocate. If you're not compassionate, then you'll never understand that these common questions about why did they stay, why didn't they leave, and why are they dealing with that? That's totally up to them in their time. And we have to be compassionate to understand that everybody processes things differently and they have a different capacity of handling things. And as well, what was my last one, D?
You said, oh, now you put me on the spot. Confidentiality, compassion, and I'm sorry, I didn't get the third one. It won't come back to me.
Okay, I
Uh,
forgot. Lavelle, did you know what I said? I didn't.
that's
I
okay.
don't know. Oh,
It's
belief,
belief.
because
Okay.
you have to believe a survivor. Many times people like to downplay it. Oh, well, she started it. Oh, well, he did this first. And why are we assessing the situation? The way they seen it is the way it happened, because we all have our different perspectives. Therefore, if we don't believe what they're saying, we are re-traumatizing and rehashing the situation that they're already trying to share in out of the trauma that they already chose to speak on it. So believe them.
Yeah, I think thank you for sharing. Um
You're welcome.
I think the values that I bring to this discussion is awareness um and knowledge, like just being aware. I would love for you all to touch on the vast definition of domestic violence, and it's so important for people to be educated about what that is and is not,
That's
how to recognize those things, within their families and homes, or their relationships. When I think of domestic violence, I always think about like a male female couples relationship, but it's a lot more, isn't it? Anybody want to
Absolutely.
add that?
well. Well, you say it's a lot more. I would say in terms of contents, Deidre, it's a lot. You know what it all entails. but in terms of a lot more than male and female, well, it can be same gender. It can be a family under the same, living together with children involved. It can be domestic violence. That term can also cover different levels of public, community, nationally, which we would probably, well, we know we're familiar with the term domestic terrorism, for example. So we can look at violence on those different levels of meso and macro, and perhaps use the term domestic violence. But what has evolved because of that is to make it more basic and narrow down to what you just said, Deidre, of intimate relationships. So the new term now is intimate partner violence is being used more so than domestic violence. However, they are used interchangeably still because people, when they hear domestic violence, they think of male-female intimate relationships. So I guess in that way, that's why I said it's more in terms of content or the definition. But after all is said and done, in terms of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, it's still the same in terms of the essence of it is power and control. So I won't hog all the definition. I know Karima want to add something to it. So you go ahead, Karima.
Yeah, go ahead, Karima. Yeah.
Doctor spoke it well when she said power and control, because that is the connector between the intimate partner and the domestic violence. Family violence, because most of us have encountered domestic violence at home first from our parents or from their relationships. So we have to always acknowledge that, what would I say to my younger self? Because we've carried trauma generationally for so long. And some people just have encountered it as adults because they don't have any, previous history, and they wake up and they realize they're in a situation. So, what is domestic violence? Domestic violence is the exchange of power and control between two human beings, or one person who's looking to have the power and control over a family or an individual. And so also when Doctor had mentioned about intimate partner violence, you also have people who never come in contact with you. You have the cyber stalkers, you have people that show up at your place of employment or know what your car look like. They have information on you and they have a intimate desire, and it becomes you really don't hear stalking anymore. But you know how people date online, those are like in alignment with being an intimate partner violent situation.
Oh, wow. Okay. That opens up, I never thought about it that way, but yeah, that would fit the profile. That would fit.
Yeah, and go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Deidre.
No, I was going to ask about, I know people don't, I don't hear when the idea of domestic violence or the term is used, you don't hear like grandparent abuse. You don't hear, child abuse. Like, is child abuse also in that domestic violence, definition, or is that something else? Or like
Well, I want to say
yeah.
it's probably arbitrary in that regarding the definition, because so now we get into systems, because child abuse is considered that in the child welfare system. Child abuse, they don't call it domestic violence, they call it child abuse, right? So however, see, it overlaps, because if there is violence going on in the household, right, between, let's say, the parents, um, or one of the parents could become violent towards the children, concurrent to being violent to their partner, husband or wife or what have you. So it gets a little bit, it overlaps.
Okay.
So children have been considered neglected or abused, and they have come from domestic violence homes. So you might hear the term domestic violence as relates to families, saying it was a domestic violence household or there was domestic violence going on in the household. And, the byproduct of that is that children are neglected and sometimes abused and sometimes sexually abused. So it gets a little messy. So to answer your question, would it be considered the same thing? I probably in some cases I've heard people refer to, you know, hitting children in the household is considered domestic violence. So I won't say that it's not. But again, it kind of vary. It depends, I guess, who's saying it or what their thought process is. But
Right. Like,
as I know it from my experience over the years, and because of the systems we have,
yeah.
you have the child welfare system, and child neglect, child abuse, and again, a lot of those children are exposed to domestic violence in their homes. So,
I think
so
that's a
I
good.
want to go ahead. Did you
No,
have
no,
another question? Okay.
no. I think that's a very good point. That because I've heard it like both ways, like traditional,
Mm-hmm.
intimate partner, and then I forgot who I was speaking to, but they kind of opened up this world of like, domestic violence could be this, it could be that,
Yeah.
just that
Yeah.
relationships or familial, relationships. And I was just
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, really? I never thought about it that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, I would say this. I've heard it referred to as domestic violence as it relates to children. I want to say more so with the older children,
Mhm.
possibly, rather than the younger. Like, let's say teens, okay? Whereas uh, I've had cases over the years where, the teens would actually want to hit back, So then now you definitely have domestic violence going on in the home. You follow me? So it kind of gets into the that definition when the activity is as such. Again, as I think about this in this discussion and making and reflecting on situations I've had over the years. But things change. I mean, it's forever changing the terminology and all of that. But as Karima and I are saying, the essence of it is power and control. And if it's okay, and don't want to rush ahead, but you were talking about knowledge and awareness,
Yeah.
right? So if I can add to it, and you may be aware of this, but for whomever may listen in to this broadcast, forms of domestic violence, okay? Because a lot of times people just think of physical abuse, and Karima has already given other forms of it, as far as cyber space or computers and social media and that kind of stuff. So, but I wanted to add more so to the forms of it being economic, right?
Mhm.
Physical, of course, that's what people tend to think of first of all when they first hear the term. uh, Psychological, emotional, sexual, um, and probably a few more. But those are like the major um, forms of domestic violence in an intimate partner relationship. And as Karima and I have already said, the objective is for one person to persistently try, and in some cases, in their mind, they succeed in uh, having control. I don't even like to use the term power and control. But that's part of the definition and part of the diagram, the power and control wheel from way back decades. But I don't know if it's actually power. It's definitely and maybe it's I don't want to extrapolate too much. This is just me thinking about this term power as it relates to domestic violence. could be a false power to the person who's inflicting the violence. That's what they feel, that they're powerful and control. So and these are the tactics, these are the forms of the power, their attempted control over the other individual, controlling the money, of course, physically abusive, psychologically abusive, emotional, sexual, and their tactics would be.
How would it for psychological or let's say emotional? What kind of
Well,
tactics?
emotional is definitely like more so name calling, degrading terms, speaking down on them. Psychological would be just kind of it's very close to emotional, but it's more of the mental piece of they can play mind games with them. They can falsely accuse them of things and trying their best to convince them of
Right.
that they did something that they didn't do, and almost intimidate them to admit it. So they'll play games. They'll do things. They could hide things. They could do things themselves, but then tell the victim, if you will. I hate to use that term, but the person in the relationship that it's them. It's their fault. You did it. You did it. Those kind of tactics would be considered psychological abuse, for example. Emotional, again, is the name calling, constantly degrading, making them feel no one wants them, their family doesn't want them, nobody will ever want you. That's part of, see, it kind of overlaps to psychological as well. So, but yeah, so these are the different forms that domestic violence can take by being inflicted by the perpetrator. And
Right.
then and so the tactics would be intimidation. I mean, they're intimidating them, they're manipulating them, right? They're isolating them. Those are tactics of domestic violence in an intimate partner relationship. So again, I'm not going to hog. So let Karima chime in and give her piece on this part if she
What do you
wants.
think about that? Because those are all different forms of violence. I know at the Peace Center, we always talk about how poverty is violence, right? And it always, like you both were saying, comes down to power and control. Yeah, Karima, what are your thoughts on these different forms of violence that we can
So you
encounter?
also have spiritual violence, where
Mhm.
people accuse you of sleeping with your pastor, or you always at church and doing this and that. And it's a form of isolation. Domestic violence is basically to isolate. When we say control, and power, they want to be able to manipulate your movement in every aspect of your existence. And that means where you go, who you see, who you talk to, and who can influence you. Who's going to give you that battery in your back to make you stand up to them when you realize that it's not a Doberman pincher, that it's a little Chihuahua with a small bite and a big bark. And so they tend to, even now, if you look at how many women are, not saying all nurses are women, just giving an example, you have travel nurses who probably made $1 million in the last year, right? They can work as much as they want to because nobody goes to work, and you got these contract nurses, right? And you got this man at home, and he could be in the street all day, he could do this, he could do that, but he can't control your finances. So then what does he do? He what did she say, talks down to you, emotional, right? Makes you believe that something was in this place and it's not. And those are forms to shrink you, to make you feel like you still need them. And so, the financial, the spiritual, and then we also have, because we have to remember that women do abuse men too. They talk to them very harshly, very sharp tongue, degrade them. It's just so many different forms. And one thing that we really have to remember is that If a person could get inside your head and rent space for free,
Mhm.
they're not going anywhere.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's like the biggest form of the manipulation, because that's what it's all based upon. Because if it was the truth, they wouldn't have to tell so many lies.
I think you it reminds me of so many of my friends growing up. When you're trying to, as young women, even
Right.
it doesn't matter the age, but when you're trying to figure relationships out, who
Mhm.
does what role, I'm the man, I'm supposed to be doing this. I'm the woman, I'm supposed to be doing that. So some things, do y'all believe that um some some of these ideas are like stem from our culture, like are come from cultural backgrounds, or from our, like, what we were taught as kids, and then
Mhm.
we try to basically put that on our next relationship, or put that on our partner,
Oh
saying
You
yeah,
mean generational abuse?
definitely, definitely. Yeah, I mean,
I'm gonna let somebody do this.
it's so it gets really really deep, Deidre. It's layered. I think Karima mentioned a bit ago about the generational piece. One of you, I think I heard mention that. And absolutely. So, Deidre, you use the term cultural.
mm,
Um, but let me say this as it relates to cultural. So, we know that culture is just not about race,
right,
right? We know that. And so, uh, however, I think historically they wanted to just think of minority cultures as having been just like saturated, so to speak, or having a lot of domestic violence cases. However, the other cultures that weren't like maybe the African American communities and culture uh, may have more privilege, perhaps, to have the formal supports and keep it more um, behind closed doors, so to speak, or keep it, uh, I can't think of the term, but just not, it was less talked about. They had places to go to help them, unlike our culture, if you will. So it can relate to cultures in that way, but also I want to talk about not only culture but race. How about that?
okay,
Now, what I want to say about race, first of all, domestic violence is not tailored to any specific race at all, at all. So we can go all the way across the waters to the Middle East, where it is accepted. And speaking about cultures, it's part of that culture that women better walk behind the guy. And if anybody listening in, I don't mean any offense, it's just a fact. In some cultures across the waters, right? Overseas, they're still exercising. We have cases here where there was a certain culture where the woman was actually killed on her job, right? Okay, but I want to talk about the African American culture as it relates to domestic violence. And this is my thought process. This is, I think, and not only me, Dr. Noel St. Bill, who's a guru of domestic violence. So generational trauma, right? So she did a really uh, good write up on generational trauma / domestic violence or intimate partner violence. Very, very thorough, really good piece. But I want to just mention one place that my thoughts go is all the way back to what we went through as a minority culture, and particularly our men,
okay,
when they were emasculated. Okay. they were not considered men. They were considered cattle, if you will. Something, they were inferior. I mean, completely. I mean, you know the story. I'm sure both of you do. So I'm talking along those lines, the way they were treated. Now, they're supposed to be head of the family, the men, so to speak, as even as it relates to the Bible. Okay, I don't know if everybody believe, and I'm not trying to portray any certain belief with me stating this, but the men, even secularly, head of the family, not only religious or spiritually, but they were not seen as that, and they were emasculated by the white men, right? So where do you think that anger went? Right? They couldn't, if they tried to, you know, react or do something about it publicly, they're killed, right? So I'm thinking part of this generational trauma as it relates going, how it may have filtered through and connected to domestic violence. Just one little stream, and all of this big, there's a whole bunch of, you know, streams to causes of domestic violence. But as we talk about, generational and culture and race and all of that, I'm just saying that my one of my thoughts, just one, is that our men and the way they were treated back then, and they were not seen as men, right? They were not considered even a human being or a man. You think that didn't affect him, right? You think that didn't affect him? So they had to just swallow, so to speak, that to stay alive, right? Now you got this embedded in their thoughts and their emotions, right? Now perhaps somewhere along the way that has to come out. Somewhere along the way, perhaps, and I'm not trying to justify domestic violence whatsoever. This is just a thought process from some research and me knowing about dynamics of domestic violence. Some I don't know at all. I'm not the guru. I'm just saying this is what is based on my thought process, what I'm presenting. So that trauma had to come out. They wanted to show that they are a man. And right today, some men think if they hit a woman, that makes them feel, again, here we go, with the power and control, right? They had no control as a man back then, right? This is not justifying it, but I'm just saying how things, as time evolved and systems and society and we as a culture and just so many dynamics is all mixed up in this. Okay. But go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay.
No, I was just saying, I think that's a great example. And like you said, it's generational trauma, not only DNA, like we learned about epigenetics, right? How some of those, that trauma, actually starts to change our DNA, but also what we pass on to how to treat your wife, how to treat your partner, how, we pass that on, right? Through our example, through our, like, some of our young men have been taught how to be Rolling Stones,
Right.
Every woman is, just a passer through.
Okay, so yeah, absolutely. And I think your example, Deidre, is probably bringing it up a bit closer to where we are now than what I was speaking about with slavery and all of that. But I definitely agree with you. Absolutely. So we can say that children have learned behavior in the home. They will mimic what they learn, what they were exposed to. Okay, whether that Papa was a Rolling Stone or my daddy hit my mama, so this is how I do. This is what I saw. Okay, so yeah, when you say passed on, it could be inadvertent. It could be just direct, yeah, you keep her in her place. Yeah, it could be that, or just inadvertent that they were exposed to it, standing in the corner or listening through the door,
Right.
and hearing mom or dad. I don't want to sound biased. Uh, hear the domestic violence going on. So yes, absolutely, it's passed on in several ways to the children, right? So you know, it's this is why, and I don't want to jump the gun, but this is why so much intervention is needed.
Which
So
leads,
much.
right into what you both are doing with your respective organizations. And
Mhm.
because, I think this first part in talking about what domestic violence is and how to identify it helps people to recognize or start to be aware in their own relationships and
Yeah.
say, okay, maybe I do need a little help. Maybe I can, get some different types of services. So,
Right.
I'm going to jump to Karima. What are you doing in Bury the Violence? Because you have a few different um, uh, uh, ministries and outreaches. Can talk about a little bit what you're doing about within domestic violence in particular, and then maybe some other things you want to bring out as well.
Okay, so I just want to backtrack before I forget.
Sure.
We have to unlearn because there's nurture versus nature, and our children can hear, see, and experience, but it's about how we move forward. And we have to stop in some of those moments and realize we can't lash out on our children because we're angry from our experiences. And it's
Right.
realistic to some people, but it's
Yep.
you owe your children. Stop thinking because you're grown in numbers that you're grown in emotion. When you can honestly say to yourself, this is hurting my children just as much as it's hurting me, we're growing.
Mhm.
We have to accept what we expose our children to. Many times we think just because they weren't in the room, they don't know what's going on. And then they get 16, 17, and they're abusing their partner.
Right.
Then you still have nurture versus nature. So intervention and programming. And so leading into that, Deidre, we do programming. There's a lot of programs available around here that are funded that can provide housing and paperwork and resources, but they're not parenting. They're not having conversations with these children. We have to go back and at primary level. So when you said I have multiple layers, Buffalo Against Domestic Violence Coalition is to service the east side of Buffalo, Black and brown women specifically, because we have a problem. We get lost in translation when you go to the other organizations and they act like they don't know what you're talking about. When the police
That's
come
right.
to your house and they end up giving you charges because you are passionate and angry and you
Yep.
don't cower down to what they're saying.
Right.
And culturally, we all really believe we can and should fight because we can. I don't have to fight no man. I don't have to fight anybody I'm in a relationship with. If I have to fight you, you don't belong in my space.
We don't need to be together. That's
Well,
right.
and so that's one thing that, but oh, I'm gonna defend myself, but why do you have to? So when the first red flag comes, because do you know me really well?
Yeah.
One and done. It doesn't take
Yeah.
7 different escalations in order for me to know you don't belong in my space.
Mhm. Mhm.
Hmm.
Everybody's not there. And sometimes we wake up in it. So Buffalo Against Domestic Violence is there to translate, is there to bring us right back to those same resources that dropped the ball because it was lost in translation. And the coalition is looking to connect. You know how we reach out to you guys when we need certain things?
Right. Yeah, we're
That's
all
what it's about. We all have to come to the table together because we can't do it by ourselves.
So
And
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sabrina. I have a question for you after you're done. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, and so we that's what the coalition is about. And then we have our Peace and Range, which is for the children, the youth, because this also stems, it leaves out of the house and spills into the schools and the streets. And so
Absolutely.
that's why we have our youth program, and to try to minimize and interrupt the violence that has started, and they're already gone. So not only addressing the primary needs, but once they're already full-fledged, full-blown teen dating violence, because that's where it goes into that next level of relationship. So we're trying to jump through the cycle. And our programs, to some people they don't get it, but I get it because I lived that life. You know what I mean? I went to school. I fought my sixth grade teacher, Mr. Matthias. I had a bus aide. I knew she had spaces, gaps in her teeth. She spit on me. I whooped her. And that was me as a kid.
Mm-mm.
But why? Nobody asked me.
Oh, yeah.
Why do you fight? Why are you now going to be a boxer? Because it's not going to be another chance for somebody else to touch me and walk away, right?
Right.
And so we really just, oh, they're so bad. Oh, they this, they, but we don't even talk and consider after what we dealt with and what they seen, heard, whether we know it or not. We don't go back and embrace our kids. And I don't mean everybody, but the majority. It's accountability. And that's what our organization is doing through Buried to Violence.
Thank you
Yes,
so
doctor?
And Ms. Clavel, you had a question for Karima, right?
Yeah. When you say lost in translation, I'm not quite understanding what you mean. I have a thought about what you mean, but I just want to make sure I'm correct. You
I
said
got
something when it gets lost, something about Buffalo and domestic violence and lost in translation. What do
right.
you mean?
You can articulate very well, right? And so when the officer comes, you know the need to articulate the situation in which
Yeah,
happened.
yeah, right.
I, I
Gotcha.
can articulate when needed, but
Yep.
everybody talk like that, right?
Right.
And I
Right.
always talk like this. And so
Yeah.
when I'm on 10, I'm just like this. And this is what it's gonna be, and this is what we're not gonna do. And we got the neck and we got the attitude, right? How
Okay.
many
I
how
got you. I got you. So I understand that, and that's a really, really, really good point, Karima. And and if I may, Deidre, if I have time, right, just for a second, I want to piggyback on that same
Okay.
point Karima just made.
Sure.
Uh, Lost in translation. So that occurs when someone goes and sit in front of a therapist that doesn't look like them.
Mm,
exactly
Okay. So it gets lost in translation because there's a disconnect
yeah.
in terms of our dialect, how we express ourselves, even our emotions. They're misread.
Mhm.
Okay, so and not only on the therapist part, but even on the person who is there to get help. Um, they feel that they're not heard, they're misunderstood, they're judged, all of those things. So I think, Karima, those things that I just described probably could fall under that term lost in translation. What do you
Ex-
think? Yeah.
exactly. And
I,
then when
I,
they go to get the services, uh,
mhm.
we are a program under my nonprofit organization, but we're
Yeah.
not. And I'm having the absolute hardest time playing ping pong with becoming an accredited organization.
Wow.
And the
Okay.
state is telling me exactly what to do. And then when I go to do what they instructed me to do, I'm getting a different answer. But my
Yeah.
response goes right back to that state person. And
Yeah.
so accountability will happen, because
Hmm.
why, that lived experience is not good enough for you. When we lived it, we know what it looks like. I lived in a shelter. And
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
I go to get these services, they don't know what we're talking about. Oh, well, I'm confused. Well, she said this and she said that. Why are you divulging what I said to somebody else, to
Right.
you? If
Confidential.
you keep
So
quiet to ask me, because I'm the one who said it to you.
So, on that same point, I just want to interject for a second, Deidre, as it relates to the Healing Station agency. Um, that was one of the impetus that we developed the Healing Station Agency with the acknowledgement that there are people like us in the community that need to go to people who look like us as for professional support, someone they can trust, someone they feel connected to, someone who understands them. And there's none except now I know Karima in
Mhm.
the community
Mhm.
that they can turn to. Even Karima's her organization is a lot more hands-on, if you will. I mean, Karima, you're out there. You're just like grabbing folks and doing what you got. And I so respect that you're doing your thing. I told you that at that meeting. So you're
Right.
just like you're in the trenches, right? So and you're doing that hands-on, what's happening now, let's deal with it type deal. So the healing station is geared towards those who have left the domestic violence relationship. They have made a decision. They're still alive, right? Thank God. They're still alive.
Yes, they can.
Now they're wanting help. They need somewhere to go, people they can trust, people that they can talk to and not feel judged, and that can lock arms with them, so to speak, and usher them to autonomy that they haven't known. Because in the domestic violence relationship, there's a dependence that develops, okay? And that dependence, it can develop because the victim perhaps haven't had support, or their family have turned their backs. You in the relationship, we're not being bothered with you. I mean, there's many reasons why they stay, or because they've never been allowed to work. So here we go with the economic piece. What you're gonna do? You don't have a job. Don't even have a clue on how to do an interview, for example, because of the isolation. Even medical. So our motto is holistic. We do spiritual, medical, and the vocational and all of that. So even with the medical, women who have been isolated, they don't go see about themselves. They don't have a primary doctor. So I'm just elaborating on those points to say when they connect with us, this is what we're geared towards, the healing, because they have been beat down and they're traumatized. They need to be embraced, right? And begin healing. This is why we include the spiritual piece, the medical piece, right? Vocational, educational. So I just wanted to say, because there's a contrast, I don't know if that's the right word. There's a difference between what Karima's doing, which is excellent. I so respect how she's going at this thing. And ours is, as you can hear, is a different model, right? But they're both so important. And so you mentioned education earlier, Deidre, real quick. We've only had 2 fundraisers. You know about them because you and my nephew have been supported, but you just haven't come yet. You've bought tickets, but you haven't come. But that's our objective at our fundraiser. We educate. So we have a program to educate, the people who are there. So last year in our first one, it was so many folks that said afterwards, I didn't realize, I didn't know. It's like, wow. So, and that's the point, because education is key. So even as we interface with survivors, we're going to educate them. They don't know. They just don't know. All they know is that they thought they were in love or whatever, and this person began to manipulate, beat them down, and whatever. So so that is our model and how we went at this. Again, they need to have a place to go. We don't have any agencies on the east side.
So speaking of
That
where to go, Can you give the audience your website address and any other information to reach you and some of your partners as well?
Okay. So our website address is HS is Healing Station Agency, the word agency.org. Okay. And then they can reach us by way of email, right? And they can be anonymous and they can just say, I want more information or how do I connect or what have you. So the email is admin, short for administration, admin at hsagency.org. So it's basically like the website, but it has admin at the beginning.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so we've done, just real quick, we've done Zoom support groups. Yeah, we have 3 of them. Was it
Do you have
3?
a Facebook page, or how do they find out more about
They
the
would go to our website because every time we do a Zoom, when we're having a Zoom support group, we announce it on our website. We also have a Facebook page that the other board members put up. I don't do Facebook. I just don't. So my other board members, they do because we have one, the Facebook page, Instagram, all of that. So they make sure the information is on that as well as our website. So we do the Zoom support groups because we realize everybody can't get to a place, because of transportation or childcare and so on. So we decided to put it on the road, so to speak, by way of Zoom.
Yes.
We're hoping to have training for professionals on narcissism next summer, and that's going to be by way of Zoom. Okay, so that means you and Karima have to chime in. It'll be for professionals on narcissism. That's another buzzword as it relates to domestic violence. But people need to understand every perpetrator is not narcissist. So you can be in a domestic violence relationship, and it doesn't mean the perpetrator is a narcissist, right? So, but I just want to make that note because more and more it's a buzzword with domestic violence. But it's definitely relevant, no question. It's definitely relevant. So I'm going to shut up again, and Karima, you go ahead.
I think we're gonna have a part 2 because you have so much just great information.
Okay.
And I think we have to do another part, a part 2. And Karima, can you give us your website and any other information you want to share with the audience before we go?
So right on our website, www.btvbuffalo.org, you can go to our help section and you can fill out our form for any resources that you need. And we are connected, I think, with 46 states to get you help. So we're in a database where we can literally put the resources in and get you what you need. And then you can email us at btvbuffalo@gmail.com. You could catch us under Bury the Violence on any social media platform to send us a message. And I heard her with the narcissistic part. It is becoming a buzzword. People jump things and they write it, and we missed a whole mess in what's really going on. So narcissistic abuse is a different thing than domestic violence. I mean, if they live in your house, yes, but that's a different leg of abuse because that's just a whole animal within itself.
Right.
But it's a character issue, So it can't be present, but it's not the whole.
Yeah, every domestic violence relationship doesn't necessarily, you're right, Karima, involve a narcissist. It just doesn't. I mean, you can have perpetrators that are violent, but they're not narcissists.
Right. Like that's our next our part two on domestic violence, because I think we need to, maybe we need to do a lot more on the education piece here.
Well, I
For
need to-
wavelengths, like, so this is going out radio, into some social media. So thank you too for joining me today on Talking Peace. I really enjoyed our conversation. I had a lot to share, and it's so much needed,
Okay.
for every community to know how to recognize domestic violence and how to heal from that as well.
That's right.
And listening to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center. Thank you to 91.3 FM, a radio station at Buffalo State College. And until next time, in peace and love, treat one another with respect and protect each other.
Your dog come up and down.
They're saying good night. I told you I was on this way. It's being recorded live.
But you know what's so funny about the